Welcome to the Positive Thought Podcast. I'm your host, Nikhil. Happy to be joined today by Amira, who is a University of Ottawa law student in your third year. Amira, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No worries. So let's talk all things law and university and COVID-19. So just tell me about what's your experience been, what's happening with your schools, with the disruptions with the whole COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, for sure. About 2 weeks ago, as you know, when these things started to escalate a little bit, a lot of schools started shutting down their classes, moving everything online, and University of Ottawa was amongst one of the last schools to actually do that. And I think what it did is create a lot of uncertainty for students. We didn't really know whether our classes would be canceled completely or moving online. I'm somebody who's in my last year of law school, so that gave me a lot of just stress and anxiety, especially around the uncertainty. But eventually our school did shut down and everything is now happening online. I do have to say though, it's a little bit challenging because a lot of students decided to go back to their families and back to their partners, children, that kind of thing. And so we're just doing online learning right now, and just getting adjusted to that with exams just around the corner has been definitely a challenging experience, but there's also good that's come out of it.
Would you say, Amira, that last year of your university, of your law school, that can be a stressful time for many?
Oh, yeah, definitely, especially because a lot of students in law school are planning to write the bar exam, which is necessary for getting your licensing as a lawyer. And we're actually supposed to write that in June, but right now we don't know what's going to happen with that. So there's definitely a lot of confusion, and just your last year in law school is generally a stressful time because you're trying to get your final grades, you're trying to complete exams, major papers. So there is a lot of tasks to get completed before you can graduate. So now that everything is kind of up in the air and uncertain, it puts a lot of pressure on students to figure out how things are going to move forward.
So you're already in a pressure tense situation with your last year, and then something like, the coronavirus pandemic happens. I don't know who could have expected that. What has it sort of done for you in terms of just the stress that you've experienced? Have you been able to manage? What are you doing just to cope with both those challenges?
Yeah, for sure. I think something that really helps is actually just being home with family. When you're at school and you live alone in an apartment, it can get boring, especially self-isolating in that environment. I don't think would be great for me personally. So being home, being with family, having a good support system is really helpful. I also think it's important to kind of just take a step back and take a deep breath and realize that, you know what, this is not the end of the world. Even though there's a lot of confusion about how things are going to move forward or what's going to happen even next week, I think it's important to realize that it's not the end of the world. It's not make it or break it. Everything will happen. So you got to have a little bit of faith. I think for me also, I like to spend my time doing things that I enjoy, just to kind of relax and remember that we're going to be okay. So I've spent a lot of time pulling out my guitar, playing music, baking, and hanging out with my nephew, all kinds of things like that.
So you've taken some such proactive measures to sort of address the stress and anxiety that you might be experiencing, right, during such times. What can you speak to? You mentioned a lot of uncertainties that are around just being third year or in your last year of law school, along with the uncertainties of the coronavirus. You're managing it by being with family, by using strategies to cope. What has it taught you about how you deal with uncertainties and how you deal with the challenges of not knowing what the future has in store for you?
I think generally it's a good time to self-reflect on kind of how you're doing in life right now, but also your question was more to how do you manage some of the uncertainties. I think it's just important to take it day by day. And I think in the beginning, when all of this started and we started self-isolating at home, a lot of people were confused and just didn't know how to spend their days. But even just being at home, you can set a routine for yourself and write down 3 things you're going to accomplish that day. And obviously it's not easy to be productive when we're going through a global pandemic, but just kind of focusing on the moment and what's ahead of you just in that day helps a lot, in my opinion.
You raised a really good point with regards to being productive. And And I suppose, the other question to ask is what does being productive mean given our current situation and capacity, right? Is being productive the same as it would be if you were excelling at work or excelling at school? Like, what does being productive mean in sort of the circumstances that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think for some people it actually does mean to do work, and a lot of people are working from home now, so just trying to keep up with tasks that you have there. But there are also, for people who maybe don't have a job right now or are just at home because they don't know what's happening with their job, I think just trying to find things to do at home. It could be reading a book or going for a walk outside, obviously keeping your space from people. Trying to set up a workout at home, things like that. Those are all, while we think that, those are not things that we do on a daily basis, I think they're still productive ways to use our time. Sometimes just sitting down and watching a movie with your family is a productive way of spending your time so that you don't feel alone. I think the other side of it is, because we're given so much more time, it's important to kind of step back and think about, what's happening in the world, reflecting on maybe how we can make a contribution for other people. There's a lot of ways to be productive.
Right. And I think, everything that you sort of mentioned are things that maybe most of us would do in our daily lives without ever even thinking about it, right? But I think productivity takes a different meaning when some of the choices that we have are taken away from us. And then if you're used to being productive in a way and that choice now gets taken away from you, it sometimes challenges you to understand what being productive means. And sometimes watching TV can be productive. And I also wanted to touch on that exact same concept of this idea that the things that were mundane are now much more apparent. But sometimes we have a hard time with that. That staying at home watching TV is sometimes too difficult. I don't know if that concept is. It's very interesting to me that I would love nothing more than to watch TV at home. But now watching TV at home seems to be a very difficult task for us to do.
Yeah, it's almost ironic that it's that way. I find that I'm somebody who, like, as a student, I like to watch one episode of a show every single day. And over the past 2 weeks, since I've been self-isolating, I probably have watched the least amount of TV that I have in a long time. And I think it's just the way that our brains function. We're all trying to process what's happening. And so we think that, the things that we usually do suddenly become, like, distant from us. And so pun intended. So I think like there's kind of both sides of it, where you can try to spend more time doing a little bit more self-care, but it's also okay to just take a step back and really just do nothing.
Is doing nothing more perceptive based, or is that an actual thing that you think we're doing, right? Because I think
it feels like we're doing nothing,
right?
Because we can't go outside,
right? And so there's an element of choice and control and also value that we place on things, right? And so I think what really it's making us do, these times that we're in right now is really evaluating our values and how we value things. We don't value watching TV. We might value it from a leisure perspective, but we don't value it as something that is, somebody who's a contributing member of society will engage in for most of the day. We value choices. When you had the choice to not go outside, now, because the choice might be taken away from you, you might be more willing to want to go out, right?
Yeah, I think we're realizing some of the things that we just take for granted. Just the ability to go to the grocery store and pick up your favorite snack, or to go to a friend's house and say hello. Those things are suddenly, we're not doing that anymore, and we have to FaceTime our friends, and it just kind of makes you realize how much of the general human experience we're missing out on. And I think when all of this is over, when we take that first step outside, when the pandemic ends, that's when we're going to be truly grateful for all the things that we have, I would hope.
Right. But I wonder if we can look at it from a different perspective, that when we find ourselves in this position, like, we don't even know if this is going to be over in a week, in a month, who knows, that how much is what we want to accomplish and what we want to hope for related to the future of when things subside versus what's happening right now. I know we were chatting and you were saying, about just living in the moment, being present and enjoying the small things in life. I wonder if this situation kind of presents us with an opportunity to not necessarily think about things that we can do once life resumes back to normal. But how can we make our lives better today?
I think it's just like, given that we have so much extra time suddenly, I think we can use that time to reflect on kind of, things that we care about, focusing on our personal growth, personal development, what are things that we can potentially work on. It's also a great time to get creative. Um, I think those are all things to kind of focus on in the moment. I am personally struggling to answer this question because I have to study for exams. So, so I think for me, it's very like I'm very focused on what's coming up for me. Just in the next week or the next 2 weeks. So, although I do think that you can take this time to just think about how you want to grow and try to implement things on a daily basis that will help you grow, hopefully.
So if we just take that example and apply it to our lives today, studying for an exam, oftentimes for most people, is about passing your grade, passing the exam, getting a mark that you want, right? How often is studying for the exam, passing the exam about the knowledge that you're learning at that very moment?
It's all about the knowledge. Like,
Right.
I don't think so. For me personally, as a law student, passing the exam and the grade that I will get is something that I know will happen. But what's important is to actually focus on what you're learning right now. And one thing to kind of note is that the style of learning that most law students or most university students are used to has suddenly changed. It's gone from face to face lectures to online learning. And so, even just trying to make sure that you spend your time still engaging with the material, still engaging with the knowledge that you're receiving. I think that is kind of what you focus on in the moment, and then obviously that knowledge that you acquire, you're gonna keep with you forever. But in the short term, you'll use it for your exam.
At the moment of studying for the exam, you're retaining the knowledge,
Yeah.
right? So what are you retaining? What are you learning as we're talking about COVID-19? What are you learning about yourself?
That I do a lot better when I go to school and have face-to-face lectures. It's something that I realized I took for granted because sometimes, you go to class and you don't pay attention, you're not fully there. But when you suddenly have to start self-regulating and teaching yourself the material versus listening to a professor lecture you, it's like a different responsibility on the student. And so for me, I'm learning how to self-regulate, right? I'm learning that maybe that's not my strongest skill set, but it's something that I can work on and hopefully something that will help me in the future. That's just one example.
Right. And do you find that the ability to even identify certain things about yourself that you might see as an opportunity to grow, to develop, and the ability to self-regulate, are you finding the ability to regulate yourself given that there's very few choices other that you could participate in? Is there a challenge for you right now, or are you able to push through?
Personally, I think it's a challenge because I'm not somebody who's used to self-regulation. I like to have a routine. I like to go by a schedule. And so the way I've kind of tried to deal with that is creating my own schedule for just the next, 2 days ahead of me or the next 3 days ahead of me, and just focusing on that and trying to figure out what tasks I can realistically accomplish. And I find that with self-regulation, sometimes things take a lot longer than they normally would because you have to motivate yourself to do it.
Right. This is great, Amira. Thank you so much for this. I think what you mentioned about self-regulation, so much of self-regulation is also self-actualization, right? The understanding that our strengths and our weaknesses, and the ability to not be afraid of the things that we might not be great at. And sometimes this opportunity might have presented you with that realization about yourself, that maybe if life just went in its way, you might not necessarily have had the chances to, right? So even in challenging positions, when we look at the situation and understand that it's how we respond to the external environment that determines the impact that the external environment has on us, we realize that we can learn a few things about ourselves. And it might not be fun to learn those things, and it might not be fun to address those things that we find out about ourselves and to be better. But at the end of the day, we are a product of the mind that we have and the resilience that we want to demonstrate and display. So all the best, Amira, in your last year of law school. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
No worries. Until next time, this is the Positive Thought Podcast.